So I'm going to start the conversation with a statement.
Yeah.
And just get your thoughts on that. One of our philosophies is that whole human beings show up in the workplace, that they do not cleave off the various parts of themselves when they get into the workspace. And
Right.
how does that statement around whole human beings show up in the workplace resonate with you?
Well, I think, there are some organizations that get that and are getting it and have gotten it and manage their businesses with that in mind. And there are others that don't. I get to work with both types. So one client organization that really gets that and has gotten it for a long time. And so there, I know that like when I'm working with particular individuals, I know that that system is behind that. It kind of gives me as a coach I feel I'll have a lot of flexibility in terms of how to help that person, because I know that the organization is going to be very supportive of them, even if there are some serious personal issues that are getting in the way of them being effective. I know that the organization understands that and will work with that. Right now I have another client organization that probably doesn't get it at all, and it's a relatively new business. It's 4 years old, but it's already worth $1 billion, and they've hired a lot of people from lots of different organizations. It's new, so it's forming its own culture. They have an HR leader that's very progressive, and she certainly gets that issue. So but working with her and helping her and with the other leaders here kind of shape that culture more in that direction, has been fun for me. And I actually think that the impact of the lives outside of work are probably more prevalent there than in the other organization. It seems like when a culture is kind of prepared for that and expects that and understands that people bring stuff along with them, it seems like that it's a little bit more forgiving. I think you see those, you don't see evidence of the impact of those other issues. I don't think show up quite as clearly at work. Whereas when the organization doesn't tolerate it very well, it doesn't understand it very well, I think you see it. There's a little less support from peers, and I think it just seems easier to see those personal issues. You can see them more clearly.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
interesting that you have both the opportunity to work with an organization that's forming and, as you say, actually creating its culture as they grow, and also working with organizations who have been around for a while and perhaps are either continuing to deepen their existing culture, good, bad, or sad, or interested in shifting the culture towards perhaps a more holistic perspective, recognizing that there is some good bang for your buck when you look at the whole human being.
Yep. That company has got 40 years of experience with all this, and it was begun with that, some of that understanding in mind, when it was formed. So,
Yeah. I'd love to ask you about, just we were talking about the whole human being showing up at work and now culture and leaders. I remember speaking with you about your experience of coaching, I think, a CEO, and I'd love for you, if you don't mind, to share that story. We were talking about when we're coaching senior leaders, often people assume all we focus on are the business issues. And yet oftentimes being a trusted coaching partner with those senior leaders affords them an opportunity to expose their vulnerable humanness. So tell me about perhaps an experience or two that you've had in working with coaching a senior leader who from the outside people might think, oh man, they're only talking about business and strategy. And yet really the conversations that you were having with him or her was pretty human.
yeah, I guess it all relates back to the priority of the moment. Yeah, there's in one organization where CEO is, let's just say his forte is not in his interpersonal skills and his innate leadership qualities. He sort of came up through the ranks, and he's been effective and been very successful, but he's not well known for his soft touch. And, most of the work with him and his organization has really been around these soft things. We'll talk about challenges with people and specific individuals, and he'll often look at me and just say, okay, what should I do? And so then we kind of I know then that we're ready to get into some problem solving. But I think in that organization's case, it's been pretty clear for a while that his weaknesses were really the thing that was really impeding the organization the most. And I think he understood that and was ready to, of course, he has a lot at stake. So for him, I think it was pretty clear he recognized and was ready to face some of these things because the organization was at a place where it's really asking him now to behave a little bit differently. Much is now is more around him leading people instead of the mechanics of creating this thing. The challenge is can he behave and perform in a way that he's never done before?
Yeah, and especially if for decades he's been behaving in a certain way. We got those patterns, and hey, as a human, once those grooves are there, we have to be really thoughtful and
Right.
quite explicit about what else needs to be happening
Right.
instead of those things. And it takes time.
Yeah, you're talking about a guy who's got more than 40 years of experience in the industry, as you just said. I mean, these things are, a lot of this stuff is hardwired.
So what was the thing that drove the insight in him to be open even to making these soft skill changes and working
He,
really
he's
explicitly
very
with?
fortunate. He had an HR leader that has known him for a long time and was able to get him to get to the place where he was ready. He acknowledged that the problems existed, and then but I really give her a lot of credit having the vision and foresight to position everything and kind of she set it all up. She may have saved the business just with what she has done. So
It's interesting that you say, she possibly saved the business. We talk about this in our world
yeah,
of, we're part of an international community of consultants who have similar philosophies and methodologies. And we talk often about how important it is for senior leaders to get it and to be willing to sort of look under the rock and make the changes that need to be changed. And it's interesting that I certainly see some organizations and some senior leaders recognizing the quite explicit impact it can have on a business, but not everybody gets that that kind of work can, in fact, possibly save the business, to your
yeah.
point.
Oh yeah. Things had gotten pretty bad and the climate had gotten pretty bad there with some of the more senior level folks that, I think he had potential for some serious and very painful flight risk at the senior level. And it was just timing was important and critical. And I think she did a really good job of positioning everything in a way that was that he could accept it. And then, once we kind of figured out what some of the issues were, to give him credit because I had delivered some what I thought was honest analysis of where everything was from terms of his people. And he went through it and lifted his eyes up from a couple of pages that I put together, and he said, "I can't disagree with anything you said here. What should I do? What should we do?"
Yeah.
So it's
He's
yeah.
seeing you as a trusted partner.
Yeah, I think that, but again, I go back to I think she really did a really good job of kind of helping position everything for that because she could have selected someone else. There are other situations you could drop me into, and I would not have been as successful. It's not about my skills; it's about the right fit, the right change agent, the right skills and the right approach, and all of that.
Yeah, good for you. Good for her. That's a great
Yeah.
story. It's interesting because often we hear about organizational change where we are brought in perhaps at the senior management level, but we don't have the buy-in by the CEO. So in that case, where you've got the buy-in from the head guy, what are some of the opportunities or obstacles ahead of him as he, tries to actually shift the culture in his organization?
Well, he's in a very, very difficult situation because he has investors who are very demanding and they have quite a bit of money at stake. So he has to balance that with, his leadership team to his credit, he's recruited some extremely competent people. So I think him balancing those two things, how does he meet the demands of his investors, which are quite high, yet he has to go back with his team and the whole organization and try to get them to buy into what seems to be kind of a constantly changing strategy because of the strategies coming from the investors for the most part. So that's his challenge.
And how do you think, how are you supporting him, in fact, in rolling out and integrating and accelerating the impact of those changes that need to be made all the way through the organization, not just with the guys with whom he has the most direct impact? What's the game plan there?
Well, one of the things we've done is, he has had me work with all of his direct reports and then all of their direct reports. So we have a pretty good handle on the leadership team in terms of skills, abilities, interest, and all of that. And as we've been bringing new people in, because they're still bringing in new people, they've hired in the last couple of years, he's brought in a new chief financial officer, a new chief operating officer, a couple other key roles at the executive level. And then, of course, they've hired additional team members below them. So we've been doing onboarding of the new people. And that allows me to kind of get a sense of how they'll fit and how they work with the new folks. And so we've been doing some new leader orientation, new leader integration work. And I have some simple tools that I use, but basically just how to create some common language around leadership styles and behavior patterns. So when the new people come in, I'm able to give them hopefully get them up and running faster. Then we're also kind of looking at their predispositions in terms of behavioral patterns. And so, part of that is you create awareness among the whole group about one another's behavioral predispositions and who they really are, and then kind of creating an understanding and acceptance of these different ways of looking at the same issues, which is really a strength if you think about it. And one of the dangers that companies like this have is that this CEO is no different from others. His initial team of folks were people that he'd known for many years, and they all pretty much thought and see the world the same way. They think about the world and see it the same way. But as he's grown, he's brought in other people who have a different perspective. And so, you want to make sure those voices get heard. And particularly with the people he's hiring, because he's hiring people with 15, 20, 25 years experience in the industry. So these aren't newbies. These are people who come in with a great set of experience and perspective. And so they want to be heard, expect to be heard, and you want to make sure those people are heard. And so, like, one of the things that he's been doing, it's real simple, but just being conscious of making sure that everybody on the leadership team is making a contribution. So if he doesn't hear from one of these alternative voices, he'll ask them, John, what do you think, to make sure that voice is expressed, because they're new. They're thinking, well, they're still trying to figure out who's on first, and they're trying to understand the agendas of all the other people on the team, and et cetera. Right. So oftentimes, they won't speak up, or they'll be quiet early on, even if they see things that really bother them or disturb them. And you want to make sure that gets out, whether it's expressed openly in a meeting or whether they go back around to the CEO and say, I was sitting in a meeting and listening, and I'm hearing some things that really bother me, or I have concerns about this. And that's another thing we're doing, is we're making sure those folks know that that's okay, and that we want them to do that he wants them to do that. So it's that, trying to nurture that, make sure that the communication channels are clear and that they're being utilized. And in 3 years, we've had no departures of anybody at the senior level or their direct reports. So what we were concerned with early on is some turnover among some critical roles. It hasn't happened, and I think that one of the reasons that he's had some stability is because of the things he's been doing. Changes he's trying to do for himself and how he's changing his behavior, and it's playing out in the rest of the year. Another thing we did is, I look at things from a systems perspective, and so I know that I can coach an individual to behave in ways that are contrary to the system that they're operating in, but it won't be effective. So how do we, take people with disparate points of view, different perspectives, and how do we make sure that their voices are heard? How do we get them to be able to operate effectively within the system that they've been stuck, dropped into, and in a system that's changing? It's somewhat fluid.
Yeah, and it sounds, if I net it out from my perspective, it sounds like a couple of key things that are being used thoughtfully and consistently to enable, like you say, that 3-year retention. We haven't had anybody leave. One is he's bringing on the right people, and then he's allowing the rightness of those choices to flourish, which is, I hired them for a reason. I want somebody with experience and different thinking and different approaches, and who's going to be willing to contribute. So that's one of the things I see, and you probably see the same, where on the one hand, people say, well, yeah, we want diversity, we want differences of opinion, and we want to cultivate innovation, but don't make me feel uncomfortable and don't challenge me on stuff, right?
Right.
The fact that he's quite explicit about ensuring that people are going to be asked, hey, John, I haven't heard from you. What do you think? Good, bad, or sad? What do you like? Whether it's in the open forum or whether it's privately, to continuously and quite explicitly solicit that feedback
Right.
100% the way to leverage diversity. But the
Yep.
other thing that really resonates for me is the fact that you yourself, as that identified right fit change agent, has been integrated into, as you say, senior leadership, middle management, and all of those people, so that there's some consistency around the support, even, and the support for integrating and accelerating the activation of the ideal culture, right? And I think too, there's an opportunity where organizations perhaps have disparate, whether it's coaches or strategic consultancy or advisors, and you get a disconnectedness that
Right.
he's overcome by leveraging you through and across the organization.
Yeah, I think, yeah. And, I really believe that my presence should be in the background. Well, I think there are many cases, and the CFO of this organization have told me, he pulled me aside one day and he said, Ed, I, for one, am very aware of the positive impact you've had on this organization, extremely supportive of you continuing to be involved with us here in some way, which was wonderful. But my work. In fact, he sent me a text one day of a book he'd finished reading called The $1 Trillion Coach. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, but it's about a guy who worked with Eric Schmidt and a lot of the heavyweights in Silicon Valley for several years. And this guy was a successful entrepreneur in his own right, and he sold his business and he sort of settled into a role as a board member and advisor to some of the big heavyweights in Silicon Valley. The CFO said, he said, either you read this book to study with this guy or this guy to study with you, because I see you doing some of the same things that he writes about. I said, well, I haven't read that book, but I will. So I read the book, and then so I wrote to him after I read it, and I said, now I know, I think why, because I think what that guy in the $1 Trillion Coach, what he was doing, he really thought he was working with the teams. He didn't think about the CEO as being an isolated person, but a CEO is a member, or the leaders being a member of a team. And so teamwork and the system side of it was something that he always held close in his work. And I think the other thing he did is he's fought to stay in the background. His influence was clear and the impact was probably undeniable, but yet, his job was to help them get better. And so I think that's important too, especially like in this organization with, you got a CEO who's under a lot of pressure. He's got probably investors who are concerned about some things. He himself is concerned about some things. And who is this guy coming in from outside? And do I allow this person to start having some significant effect on my business? Do I want that? Can I trust this person? So I think for me, I think it's important for people that are in our roles. It's part of my style, but I also think it's part of being an effective change agent is. And I see myself, I tell people, anytime I show up there, I'm an intervention. I mean, if I'm working with one person, if I'm working with a group, it's an intervention and I'm impacting things, whether I'm purposefully doing it or not. Me just being there is a change, right? And so if I just sat in a room and did nothing but listened all day long, I'd still having an effect. So I think it's important that we really be conscious of what effect we're having and make sure that it's the right effect. And if we're not creating positive change and if we're not having a positive effect, we need to extricate ourselves. So, but I think that's a important part. I studied with a fellow in my graduate program. His name is Charlie Seashore, and he died a couple of years ago. Charlie was an organizational psychologist and studied with Kurt Lewin and worked with a lot of people at National Training Laboratories many, many years ago when all of that was coming out of the ground after the World War II. And Charlie wrote a lot and talked a lot about and being conscious of his impact on the group, whoever he's working with. And there's a lot of research about this, there's the whole genre of action research where the researchers are actually, they're not sitting in behind one-way mirrors making observations. They're actually in the group that they're studying. They're participating in that group. And so that's, in a way, that's what we are, I think, as coaches. So there's an intervention taking place, whether we recognize it or not. I think the most important thing for us to remember is to watch and observe what impact are we having. And can't just follow a script, because the script won't work in every organization. Too many individuals or too many variables. I just think it's important that we are always paying attention to that. what impact are we having on this person? What impact are we having on this group, on this organization? Am I doing the right thing? Is my impact moving things in the right direction? Because you're not going to stay there long. Somebody's going to fire you, and they should, if your work is not having a positive impact.
Yeah, I love that equation of a coach being a change agent, because to your point, that's in effect what we're doing. And if we're
Yeah,
not supporting change and we're not driving change, we're not facilitating change, then why are we there?
right,
We have to actually be and holding people accountable to do the work that
right.
results in the change, as you say, in the right direction. Even just being that beacon to say, hey, what do you notice? Are you in fact moving? Sure, there's lots of change, but is it in fact the right change, right? Is it connected with some of your values and strategic imperatives?
Yeah, one of the pioneers in coaching is a guy named Tom Leonard. He founded Coach U and ran Coach U for years. And one of the things, and I'll paraphrase what he said, but he said lots of things. But one of the things he said that I've always held in kind of in a high spot is, one of our roles is to see people and hold them in a place that maybe they can't see themselves in yet, and put them in a place. And so I think that's a real important part of what we do, to help people see them doing things that are going to help them get what they want.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so important. It makes me think of two other things that often are referred to in this space: the unconditional positive regard that
Yes.
Rogers speaks about.
Yeah.
And connected to that is the role of the coach in really supporting the other person to unlock and recognize and activate their own potential. To your point,
Yes.
it's about helping them see what they can become, right?
Yes. I mean, I think that's, when I enter these things, I mean, that's where it's funny because I've got like 5 people that I'm working with one organization. They all have some challenges that are keeping them being more successful. But, I was telling one of the leaders over there, because I've talked with a leadership group recently about the progress of the group I'm working with. And so they were asking me about specific people. It just occurred to me when I was talking, I really like all these people, and they're all very different, but I really like them as human beings. But I think it's because, I don't know if I've ever coached anybody that I eventually didn't like. When the stuff peels away and it's just one human being, in communion with another, and you're there sincerely trying to help them. Bad behavior and a lot of things that people do that upset you, you can sort of understand them. You understand them, why this is happening, and you kind of like them for who they are, and they can get better. And so I don't know. I always think about Martin Buber and his book Ein Thou, and basically he was a German Jewish theologian. It was in the 1800s, and the book in German is "Ich can do," but there's one translation his family authorized in English, and it's Ein Thou. And in the book, basically what he says is, anytime two human beings are having that kind of connection and they're focused on each other, that's where God is. That God is in that place. And I feel like that often with people. We have these moments as coaches where I was telling my coach, I had my phone call with my coach yesterday, and we were talking about this. I said, there are just times and it doesn't happen with everybody, but with a substantial, significant percentage of the people that I work with, I can get to that place where I guess I'm listening. I've learned, I've gotten to know them a little bit. I kind of understand who they are, and I'm listening for other things now. So we're at a deeper level it's a communion for me. And I think that's why I love this work so much, because I just love that feeling. And, but, I feel like there's something special going on in those moments, and questions will come to me, and I literally don't know where they're coming from. They're coming from some unconscious place. God has given them to me. It's like I'm channeling, I mean, it really does feel that way sometimes, not all the time, but I can get that way with some clients, and it's just enough to keep me going, because I just love that. I would do that for free. Don't tell anybody, but I mean, if I could have that experience, it would be so hard for me not to do that.
But that's, when you talk about that, the root word of communication, commune is communion,
Right.
communication. Everything is connected, and it goes right back to what we talked about at the beginning of our conversation about whole human beings showing up at work. And what you're able to do when you're supporting them through your coaching is to see them as a whole human being and to connect with them in a very human way. And that then opens things up, as you say, opens up channels of insight, opens up channels of vulnerability, opens up channels of creativity and innovative solutions and problem solving, that when we forget that those people who are being irritating or a little difficult aren't human, we forget all that humanness and the potential within that just needs to be recognized and unlocked again, right?
There's a Vietnamese Buddhist monk named Thich Nhat Hanh who, again, I'll paraphrase, I won't get it right, but he basically says, when someone's being rude to you or mean to you or something, it's because they're suffering. If we could all remember that, and my wife is Buddhist, and she's grew up in Vietnam, and she's been in the United States now for a couple of decades, but she still pays attention to her Buddhist leanings, and so we talk about that, and we try to remember that when we feel like we're being mistreated or people aren't respecting us or whatever. But I think that's a good thing for anybody to hang on to. But I think it does, if you link it to the other suffering somehow. And it helps you be a little bit more empathetic, I think.
Yeah. And so imagine that awareness and then the choices being made either in a leadership capacity, in a peer capacity, in a cross-functional team member capacity. If you, as you're suggesting in that one organizational example where you're actually supporting people in various levels, imagine if every one of those individuals was even shifting a little bit towards that perspective. Holy cow, the amplification of that effect would be incredible.
There's no doubt. But I think the really, really, really good leaders get that already. Like, I was on a phone call this morning with a president of one of my clients. He's a relatively new president of a division of a huge financial services company, and his division contributed $1 billion in profit to the parent company last year. So that's how important his company, his role is. And he clearly gets this. And I think to the point where even the folks above him in the organization aren't there, but he is, if that makes sense. And so because he's there, he has another set of challenges almost, if that makes sense.
I exactly know what that is. Yeah.
Because I spoke with his boss recently, and I don't think his boss is as close as he is to that place. And so I think that's causing a little friction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's still seen as, and this comes up in so many conversations these days about politics and ideologies, that we're in very much a black and white, either or paradigm. And it's kind of in this place too, where, and maybe this is the case here, correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes leaders are either seen as being sort of very enlightened and involved, people focused, empathetic, whole human being leaders, or they're seen as very strategic, results oriented, get stuff done leaders. I believe strongly that you can do both. Right. But I do think there's still a mindset that if this, then, oh my gosh, you must not be a very strategic business person.
Yeah. And I think, I think that's partially kind of, that's one of his, it's not a huge issue because his organization is so successful and he's doing all the right things. I mean, I think there's no issues imminent, but it's just a little bit of a challenge, I think, for him because he's further along in this regard, I think, than the people that he reports to.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, an example of that, he has zero interest in joining that team. And I think that's Swan, because I think he'd rather could be able to operate and run things the way he believes. The next level up's not ready for that yet.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like one is that he's very clear on his values, and he's also very clear on attaching choices and day-to-day behaviors to those values, including whether or not he wants to continue to, go up the ladder to a place where maybe he doesn't have that same connectivity.
You just nailed it. Yeah, that's exactly right. He's generating $1 billion in profit, so he's getting paid extremely well for the job. Because I told him one day, we were talking about this, laughed. I said, I hope they're paying you well. Laughed. I knew, and it's a public company, so I know what he's earning. Yeah.
He's doing okay. He's
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
okay. And imagine the impact that he's having on the people who work with him and under him. Oh my goodness.
He's driving. Well, I actually think that I would not be surprised to see him get tapped for something much bigger in the next few years, because I think if he's successful in doing if his plan and his plans, and he's been at it for he's things are already in motion, but if he continues to do what he's doing and is able to make the changes that he is planning, and I think that his piece of the business is going to be so successful that the board and other people are going to be looking at it and saying, maybe we need to broaden his influence.
Amazing. So as we kind of wrap up our chat today, Ed, what are some of the things that you think of, just the space of business and the space of the humans within the business and the work that we do? What are some of the opportunities, or what are some of the shifts that you find most exciting right now that you're observing or you're reading about or experiencing?
Well, I think it's maybe a little bit overplayed already, but I do think that as by and large, the coaching world, the coaching community is kind of clueless about the imminent impact of artificial intelligence is going to have on what we do and organizations, because the data and the power of data collection. One of my clients is involved in the construction of data centers. They were telling me the other day that the data center construction business is so hot right now that, and data centers are basically big, huge storage centers, data storage centers, right? And I mean, they're building backups to backups now, and this data is so important. And the investments that are going into this are unbelievable. Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, any large these so-called tech companies that are collecting all this information, they're investing heavily in this. And what's coming out of it is artificial intelligence. And I think that if you collect enough data points about an individual, you pretty much know, you can predict pretty much exactly what they're going to do given a certain situation, right? So there's enormous potential benefit to those of us who are in that work, and it could be a threat to a lot of people, because I think a lot of the coaching, particularly like across organizations, it's probably going to be done by AI. And I don't mean, I think, because look, we know coaching is very effective and organizations know it's effective. They can't really afford it for everybody. And this one-on-one coaching or even team coaching or group coaching, it's hard, it's expensive. So I think you're going to see a lot of implementation of AI in smartphones and things like that. And people are going to be as coaching. There's going to be some coaching adjunct stuff that technology is going to start to do. So I think that's coming. And then, of course, too, the same kind of thing with robotics, and all the jobs are going to be eliminated over the next few years due to technology and robotics specifically. And it's really going to impact how people work, what people do to make a living. There will probably be a lot of new industries that will emerge. Most of them we don't even know yet. But who knows? We're going to be in this transition period. What are governments going to do when people don't have jobs? What do people do with leisure time now? So there's a lot of issues there to kind of impact people and jobs and organizations, and what we do, how we play in that as coaches. I think there will be big roles for us to play as coaches, but then I think we're going to have to change how we do what we do. And I can't tell you what I think that is right now, but when people ask me what I'm doing, well, I'm implementing and adopting technologies into my practice. And so I'm looking at the new things that come on the marketplace and say, should I, even if it eliminates some clients, should I integrate that? It might mean that I lose some business. Maybe I'll lose some individual coaching work, but maybe the technology will allow me to impact a broader group of employees in an organization. So, I've been looking at things that, like technology, trying to figure out how I can integrate some of that stuff in how the work that I do.
Interesting. Yeah, I think, when I think about AI, and as you suggest, all of the activities and processes and industries that it will impact, there's always going to be room for and need for the human interpretation and support of data and insights, and what are you going to do with it, et cetera. And I think like to your point around, the skills of coaching, particularly around, future forward appreciative inquiry, right? Trying to get people into that problem solving prefrontal cortex space is going to be really useful as we go through this change. It's another revolution that we're going through as a human cohort on this globe. Those kinds of holding space for those big questions.
Yes.
How might we, not just how are we going to, but how might we approach this, and what is possible, and how do we cultivate and support the cultivation of those kinds of non-binary conversations. Like that's quite explicitly right in the pocket of coaching skills, right?
Yep. Yep.
I think that'll be interesting.
My guess is in the not too distant future, to have an individual human coach will be considered a huge luxury. So for the most of the people, they'll be internal coaches, and they're using AI, and they'll teach coaching skills to managers and supervisors. And I've got a couple of companies that are requiring all their managers, anybody's in a leadership role, to take a very intense class on coaching. And their goal is for that. They want to coach. They want an organization of coaches. They don't want managers. They want leaders and coaches. Yeah. And so I think you'll see that. And then I think with the technology, so I think that for those of us that really want to continue to do individual coaching, face-to-face coaching, that sort of thing, are going to have to probably change how we do things a little bit, augmenting what we do with some technologies.
Well, thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome. I enjoy talking with you.